Pointy Vio here. We're going to be starting up a little mini series. See, this little series I was going to make into one video, and the more and more I focused on trying to make it into one video, the more I realized it would have been like one 30-minute long video, and nobody really wants to watch a 30-minute long video, so I figured I'm going to break this up into a ton of little videos. This little series is going to be on how to use staple cards. All the staple cards are going to be included, from Dark Hole to Mystical Space Typhoon, from Torrential Tribute to Waboku. These cards are all cards that can be considered staples depending on the deck you're playing, in which some decks can't utilize them to their max advantage while other decks can. I'm going to be focusing this episode on the card Mystical Space Typhoon. When I'm starting up this game, I'm using windups. My opponent I think was using Black Wings at the time. I start off my turn activating a factory, and he went first. So the first thing he did, chaining to the activation of my factory, was Mystical Space Typhoon. That duel, I was able to set 3 back row and not fear all of them getting destroyed by Mystical Space Typhoons, in which I actually ended up winning the duel because he was unable to space my Torrential Tribute. In complete honesty, my first activation of that factory was 100% a bluff because I knew somebody was going to Mystical Space Typhoon it. In the end, I would like to say Mystical Space Typhoon has several things that should be seriously considered before using them. The first thing that should always be considered is the field. If I have 5 cards that are all face up and you're going to Mystical Space Typhoon, you better be strategically placing what that Mystical Space Typhoon is in order to do it. Let's say I have face up Swords of Revealing Light, I have Kaiser Coliseum, and I have 2 Fiendish Chain and let's say a Call the Haunted. If you have 1 Mystical Space Typhoon, you should generally hit the Kaiser Coliseum because that is what's hindering you from spamming monsters, unless that's not the problem, or hit the Fiendish Chain if your monster is Fiendish Chained right now, or if your opponent has some really big monster that's Call the Haunted. So in this aspect of the card, you need to know what to hit based off of what's on the field. The second thing to focus on is not just the face up, but also the face downs. A lot of times, you will be able to do some either deductive reasoning or actually know what it is. If you're facing Fire Fist, they do a lot of setting straight from the deck. If you're facing artifacts, you will know that they're going to probably have a monster back there, and most of the time they're setting it once again from the deck, so you'll know what it is. Now, if you're facing that kind of deck, or another circumstance has happened, which I'll explain in a second, you should know right away which cards are most important to hit. If you have a Mystical Space Typhoon, and the 3 cards your opponent has face down, 2 of which are these Fire Fist trap cards, that means the third one is probably any kind of other card, making that your highest viable target for you to destroy, especially if you're using something like Medolce's, where you can just return the monster that the trap cards would make stronger. In the end, that would be a primal time to MST the 3rd card, because you know what the other 2 are, and you know how and if they're going to hurt you in any way. Now, if you're facing something like artifacts, you might know those 2 are artifact monsters, so that 3rd one might not be. It's not the best to Mystical Space Typhoon against artifacts, but if you know for a fact that that 3rd one is not an artifact, that is when you can use that. Now here's the other situation. This is something that Deck Style Enigma actually touched on a little bit in the past. What happens is, I summon a monster, such as I'll summon, let's say, Medolce Mageline. My opponent sets 4. On my turn, I'm a little nervous of all that back row. So instead of doing something else, I might either summon another Mageline or just attack directly. If I attack directly with the Mageline and nothing happens, that means that either the opponent does not have a card to stop attacks or they're not willing to stop attacks. On the next turn, I can perform 1 summon, and if that 1 summon does not completely get destroyed, there is no reason to overextend with all of that back row, meaning that in this battle phase, I can declare 2 attacks. If neither attack gets stopped, that means I can sit on those 2 monsters for quite a while until I am able to get rid of the back row. Now, if they have 2 cards face down and my Mageline has attacked 3 times directly, that means on my turn, I get my new monster, I want to summon it, I can assume that those 2 cards are probably summon negations as opposed to attack negations. At the same time as, if I've been attacking a bunch, and then I summon another card, and he sets another card on his next turn, I should know that the first 2 are probably not attack stoppers, but that 3rd one probably will stop some sort of attack because I do not know what it is, and he has not chained the first ones. Now, this reasoning is heavily based on the fact that maybe your opponent's been saving a Mirror Force for when you have 2 monsters, or maybe that D Prison's only saved for a really, really strong monster. But at the same time then, if I am suddenly having 2 monsters out, and they have not changed one of those first 2 cards, that leaves a higher chance that that 3rd card they set is something to stop your attacks. Moving on, there's other things you need to take into account with the Mystical Space Typhoon. You have 3. There are tons of cards like it, but very few people actually play the main deck Death Tornadoes, and if you do, great. Another card that people use to get rid of back row is Night Beam, which is a card that is okay. It has its issues, meaning it has to be face down, which means you can't get rid of face up cards like Kaiser that might be shutting you down. And then they have other monsters, such as the Owl card, which gets rid of set cards even though they can be chained. Wind Up Arsenal Zenmayo, which are both generic XYZs, 1 for 5, 1 for 3s, which can be easily made by the majority of the top decks of this format. So, being able to get rid of back row is not the biggest problem. When you think about back row though, what is the biggest problem? Not face down cards, not trap cards, but face up continuous spell cards. A lot of times, if it's an equip, you can just get rid of the monster. Or if it is a trap card, you can use random cards like the Trap Eater that the Better Man's been testing with. You can even use cards like Royal Decree or even Trap Stun to help fight the trap cards. But when the opponent is using a face-up, continuous spell card, you really have to be focusing on how to get rid of that specific card. Mystical Space Typhoon is one of the few options that people actually use to get rid of this card. So you really have to weigh your options on what your opponent's doing. If the opponent activates the card Swords of Revealing Light, are you willing to waste the Mystical Space Typhoon on that Swords as opposed to trying to hit any other back row or maybe a field spell or any other kind of situation than rather just wait out the 3 turns? Which is more important? Now if you can OTK and the only card your opponent's sitting on is a Swords of Revealing Light, hitting the swords will have no downside to you because you can hopefully push for game on that turn. Now, if your opponent is using a card like Kaiser Coliseum, which is hindering your plays, that is an appropriate time to hit the Kaiser as opposed to any of the face down cards. Because in the end, Mystical Space Typhoon is supposed to help it balance the game to the point where your game is not completely hindered while their game may be completely hindered. The whole point of this Mystical Space Typhoon is to balance out the game. Now, if you're using a deck like Madolche's, the macro and the D-Fisher could really shut you down. So as I was saying, the only time you should get rid of a face-up card, which is the hardest one to get rid of, is if it hinders your play. Because a face-up spell card is the most difficult card to get rid of. You can stop its original activation if you use Dark Bribe. I would not ever say use Dark Bribe because there are so many games I win because I draw the card off of Dark Bribe. Besides the point, I would say Mystical Space Typhoon is best used on face-up spell cards that are hindering your game or face-down cards in which you have an idea of what it does with the whole Mirror Force Bottomless thing I was explaining earlier. The next video I'll do on this little series is going to be talking about the staple 4 traps, the Compulse, Warning, Bottomless, and Torrential Tribute. All of these cards will be explained and when you should not use them, and this will help just kind of keep this little video moving forward. Also, the weather's actually getting decent here over in Iowa land, and so I might be able to start recording outside. If you guys want me to record outside, like the Dexile Enigma used to do, Nim Nim, and several other YouTubers have been doing, tell me in the comment section below what you think. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. If you want to see some specific card or card set or even just deck in general talked about, go right ahead and tell me below what you think. I hope you enjoyed watching, and as always, have a nice day. Yeah.